Well, thank you guys. And I see too many waters on the table. You're going to have to do heavier than that. So I really appreciate you asking me back again. It does make me concerned about your thought process. But the fact is that I really appreciate being here. I do, as you guys know, I do a lot of speaking engagements all around the country. In fact, next week I speak at the AGC National Convention, and then later in the week I speak at the Advancing Prefab Conference in Phoenix. So I do a lot of this stuff, but what I do mostly is actually practice law. And the issue to me is that we've been talking about contracts, et cetera, in the last few times I've talked with you guys. And contracts are really where everything does start. But then there's the project. And what we haven't talked about really is what happens once the project starts. So we're going to talk today about how do you get this in reverse? Or can you? Can you go back one slide? Thank you. Today we're going to be talking about claims. And I know that that's sort of a dirty word to subcontractors, claims. I'm going to make it not such a dirty word. And I want you to do me a favor. In this room, I'd like you to raise your hand if you think you do good work. Better be 100%, right? Better be 100%. How many of you think your good work adds value to a project? Looks like 100%. That's great. Finally, one more question. How many of you think you should be paid for that good work you do that adds value to a project? Thank you. Yes. So now I got a question for you, because this one I think is much more difficult. Why is it that so many subcontractors I talk to are afraid to put in legitimate claims for realistic costs that they deserve to get on a project that's beyond the contract scope? Why is it? And I bet every one of you, I won't ask for hands, but I bet every one of you has been in that situation where you know you deserve to be paid for extra work that you did on that project, but you don't ask. And why is it that you don't ask? I'm going to guess, only because I talk to a lot of you guys. I'm going to guess that it's because you're afraid of ruining what? The relationship, right? Well, I think you guys know me by now, and I think you know that I represent a lot of general contractors also, all across the country. And so one of the things I can tell you, and in fact, you probably know, I am very tied in with the Associated General Contractors of America. I was actually on the board of directors for a number of years. I was the only attorney in the country to be on the board of directors for the AGC of America. At the same time, I was on the board of directors for the Associated Builders and Contractors. So I know and represent a lot of general contractors. And you know what? You're not going to ruin your relationship by putting in claims if they're done properly and they are legitimate, okay? So we're not talking about here of puffing up claims, because you're right, you will ruin the relationship. And we're not talking about doing claims improperly, because that also tarnishes the relationship. And I will give you one example that I think is really important, because I've always been intrigued by this. The number one electrical contractor in the Northeast is also known for putting in the most claims of any subcontractor in the Northeast. Why would a general contractor continue to seek out and hire an electrical contractor who is known, I mean really known, and legitimately known for putting in the most claims? Your answer is threefold. First, they do good work. But guess what? I just asked you if you do good work, right? They give good numbers. I'm guessing that each one of you guys feels you give good numbers. 3, they provide claims properly, and they provide claims that are legitimate. And so the general contractors continue to line up at their door to hire them for projects. So merely by putting in claims does not ruin your relationship. It's how you do it and the fact that you know that it's a legitimate claim when you do. So we're going to start off by just talking about the fact that, well, you know that claims can be made and disputes can occur before the project, during the project, and after the project. You also know that they can be created by owners, contractors, suppliers, design professionals, all of them. But one of the keys while you're putting in a claim is that you do what? You keep working. Depending on the claim. Don't get me wrong. If your claim is the fact that you haven't been paid in the last 6 months, you shouldn't be working anymore, okay? We can get to that. We can talk about that. But the fact is that most claims that you're going to be looking for extra work, you continue to work. And that takes away your risk of what? Liquidated damages, of being held responsible for holding up the project, for other things, breaching your own contract, etc. You don't want to do that. So, you keep working, and it's somewhat of an art form to continue, there we go, somewhat of an art form to continue to work while you put in a claim. You can put in a claim, but when you do so, you have to do it with understanding that there's a lot of skills and resources involved, and these are some of them. And by the way, I'm up here not wanting to just talk for, I think it's 2 hours. I want to drink too. No, I'm just joking. I want you guys to ask me questions as we go through this, please. This needs to be a dialogue. We need to discuss these issues as we go through, and I need to answer questions as we go through, because merely waiting till the end makes it very disjointed. So please feel free to interrupt as I go through this. If I don't see you, just shout out, okay? Because these lights are bright. So now we're talking about why are there changes? Well, the first reason why there are changes on a project is because I got to explain to you, contract law is very simple. Very, very simple. Contract law says that you have to perform a job exactly as outlined in the contract. Okay? Very, very simple principle. But we also know what? That there are also always changes in the project as you go through. Not just yours, but anywhere in the project. I'm not saying every time you guys put in or perform your scope of the work, there's a change, not by any means. But on a project, there's many different changes throughout. I've never heard of a project, start to finish, that didn't have changes in it. Well, that would be strange, because everybody is under a contract to perform their scope of the work exactly as outlined in the contract. But that's why there are change provisions in a contract. And there are change provisions in a contract that have all sorts of requirements to them. So I told you before, you need to bring a claim properly. That's the term I used, right? Properly. And you're going, yeah, Ron, what the heck is properly, okay? What's properly? Well, the first thing you need to do is start looking at what events might cause a change, or what events might cause a claim. You need to look at them in a timely manner, make inquiries throughout to maintain communications is critical, and you're going to look for key events that occur throughout the project. I'm going to get into those in more detail. I'm going to skip this one for now because I might come back to it. Notice provisions. Notice of the claim is the most critical thing when bringing a claim that you could possibly have. So let me talk about this for a second, because this is where subcontractors have the biggest issue. And when I say bringing a claim properly, the most important aspect of that is the notice and the timeliness of the notice. Because if you're not giving timely notice, guess what? You have screwed that general contractor. And so now your relationship can be tarnished. What you're really talking about is providing them notice as the project goes on. And as soon as you see an event that could cause a problem, that could cause an impact to your work, that's when you have to notify them. If you wait, if you think that unfortunately the work wasn't ready for you at a specific time, but maybe you can make it up, and you try, and 2 weeks past your scheduled completion, you're finally completing your project, but you're notifying them then that I really didn't delay the project, because guess what? You really should be paying me because you delayed me in the start, and that threw off everything. I didn't have the number of guys that I was going to have if it went at the time it was supposed to, etc. Now, all of a sudden, you're putting in that claim because you're 2 weeks into it, you get extended general conditions, etc., etc. And the GC is saying, what? Wait a minute. Why am I getting this now? Why am I hearing about this now? I needed to hear about this when you were first delayed. And I know, as a GC, that you're not impacted at that point. You may be impacted because of that, but I need to know that then. And guess what? You're not impeding your relationship with the GC by telling him you might be impeded by this event that interfered with the start of your work. You're actually helping that relationship, because now the GC can plan on that, and they can go to the owner and say, this is a problem, this may be a problem. Do you want me to pay the flooring contractor to accelerate? Or are you going to allow them to do their work to see if they can get done on time without acceleration? But if they don't, we're going to owe them additional money. It allows them to plan for that cost. And so you're actually improving your relationship there, because you're working with them, you're communicating with them, and I can tell you from the other side, that's exactly how it feels. That as long as the subcontractor is telling them and keeping them advised of the issues, that's what occurs, that you improve your relationship. It's when you don't give timely notice, when you don't provide them. Because guess what? As I state on these slides, the contractor can pass through your claim to the owner. They can talk to the owner about it if they feel the need. And if they don't feel the need, that's up to them. But the issue is you're providing them communication, and communication is the key.
Can you define,
please?
What is formally notify?
Formally notify is in writing. It's a written note. It's a written notice. It can be literally just an email to them or a letter that states whatever the event was that you feel might impact your work. And it's not always time, but what's that? I would stay away from text. Emails have been accepted by courts. Texts, some have been accepted. The only problem with texts is they're very central to a specific cell phone. Emails, you can copy more people on, etc. I always recommend, if you're doing it electronically, which basically every communication is nowadays, it's done through an email. And you're usually, in something like this, you're copying more than one person, because you're letting them know of the event. And so the fact of the matter is I would use email, but it doesn't have to be, there's no formal, I'm not talking about some formal pleading type of document. I'm talking about a communication notifying them of a possible claim and the impact of which caused it, okay? And I will, yeah, please, check.
Perfect world, I see that, but
Kevin.
World, we're at the end of the job, and the contractor has got to meet a deadline. They don't want to go to the owner and say it's going to be delayed because that makes them look bad. They just expect us to add more people to get it done and be on time because usually the end date doesn't change.
Well, that's correct. But again, if you're going to them early enough and explaining it to them and explaining in writing, you then get to discuss with them if they want you to accelerate, which is going to have an additional cost to it. But you get to have that discussion with them. And again, it's all about communication, and that's why I'm not here to, in any way, to impede your relationships with your contractors. I wouldn't be up here talking about claims if I felt that that was going to impede your relationship or tarnish it in any way. Yeah.
So just real quick, as far as the formality of it, I mean, do we need to reference the notice clauses in the contract, or is
Now you're getting into the formal claim itself, and we're going to get into that.
Okay.
Right? At this juncture, what I'm talking about is just discussing with them an impact that has occurred on the project that may impact your ability to perform your work as outlined in the scope of work in your contract. Yes?
So we've been told to avoid the use of the word notice in this initial conversation. Just, would you say this is a notice, or would you just use general language?
No, we use notice.
Okay.
Notice of a potential claim.
Okay.
And again, you're not saying that you are going to have one. This is basically to start the line of communication and to show that early up front, this is when you gave your potential notice or your notice of potential claim. And the reason, again, is so that you can start the communication. And if they say, no problem, just continue your work, and your work does end up being extended 2 weeks as a result of that, you're putting in now a claim for those 2 weeks of costs. You have that notice that you gave them early on, where they basically told you to not worry about it, continue on. And when they respond, if it is literally just a call from a supervisor who says, got your email, just go ahead and go forward, no problem, we understand, just go forward. Confirm it in writing, okay? I can't enforce that enough, that it doesn't have to be a formal writing. Don't get all nervous about that. It can, again, just be an email. Thanks for the call. I understand that in response to the notice of potential claim, you've instructed us to just move forward at our normal pace, no acceleration, even though this may cause a delay in the project. Yes?
So with that reconfirmation in writing, how far do you have to push them to reply to that email that you sent?
Oh, you have to. You have to get a reply. Because especially if it's something where you're notifying them of the impact, and you need to understand, you need to know how they want you to proceed. There are some impacts that you would not have to have a response to, but most impacts, especially if it has to do with scheduling or anything, you want them to respond so that you understand whether you need to accelerate. And acceleration can be done in several different ways. But you need to know whether they want you to accelerate or continue forward, and they'll pay, basically pay if there's additional work. They don't have to say they're going to pay for the additional time. But as long as they're telling you to proceed at the normal course, don't accelerate. We're not going to be responsible for any acceleration costs. That's fine. Proceed at the normal course. But then when you do put in the claim, at least you've notified them up front. And then it's up to them whether they are passing it through to the owner or passed it through to the owner at the beginning. Okay, so this was an actual example of a case that we worked on. This was as they were built. Yes. Oh, do we?
Just for 1 second?
Yes, please, Jeff.
This is super important. Is Cleet here somewhere? I have your wallet.
Oh, that is important.
Cleet Stratman, are you in here? No, you're not Cleet. That was figures.
Yeah.
Does anybody want a Cleet Stratman credit card? Okay.
Looks like it's an open bar. So anyway, this was this photo on this slide was an actual case that we handled where while they were, this is the seaport in Boston, and while they were digging through this foundation, they actually came across an ancient shipwreck. And it was critical that the minute they hit it, and they weren't sure what it was, here you can start to see what it is, but the minute they hit it and weren't sure what it was, they gave notice of a potential claim relating to a differing site condition. And the fact of the matter is that had they not done that, there may have been an issue because of the fact that that ended up delaying the project about a year. And so it was critical that they gave immediate notice, and at the time had no idea what they had hit. They just knew they had hit some differing site conditions, and as they dug it out, it came to be a shipwreck. Very interesting. So now you get into how do we take care of this? How's the best way to look at these potentially bringing claims? Well, the first thing I'm going to tell you is the easiest thing to do for you guys, because where does this start? Where do you look when you begin to figure out whether you have a claim or not? Well, you look to the contract. That's your game plan, right? I've talked about that before. That's your game plan to that project. So you look to the contract, and hopefully you have negotiated the terms to that contract, but you look to the contract, and I have to tell you, there's no substitute to knowing your contract. And you know, we've talked about that before. But I'm going to go a step further and say with each project, task one person in your organization who should be responsible for reading through that contract and for summarizing the critical dates, times, provisions, notices, deadlines, how to give them. And it is so important to have that outlined in a summary form for each project you do. Now, why am I telling you to do that when the contract is written? You know, once you sign the contract, why am I doing it then? Why wouldn't I wait till there's a claim? Why wouldn't I wait till there's a dispute for me to actually go and look at it, right? That's when I should be looking. No, of course not. You need to do that at the beginning because you don't know what the timing is. You have no idea. You don't want to get into the situation where you have a very legitimate claim. You're not concerned at all because this is a critical amount of money that we're talking about from the organization. And you're putting in a claim, and guess what? Oh, crap, we signed a contract that says all notices for any claims should be provided within 3 days of the event causing such impact. And now you thought you were doing fine. It's a week later. We read the contract a week later, and you're going, oh, we're 4 days past the deadline for that notice. So now you're kind of screwed. You're hopefully calling your construction attorney and saying, what can we do here? And we're trying to unravel things that is not in a good position, and I'm going to tell you that it's not in a good position if you pass deadlines in your own contract. Now, there are obviously ways that we're going to try to figure it all out and handle it, but that's not where you want to be. You want to have had that right from the beginning, that flow chart, that summary, that your employee, whoever it is, has prepared after reading the contract that tells you all of the different deadlines. So you're able to understand that prior to going into the project. So this is sort of a list. And I do believe that, Jeff, this PowerPoint is available to everybody, right? Yeah. So this is a list of what I think should be in that flow chart. And what would be you need to know when you're going through preparing that, either written notice or the submission of the claim or the demand for the arbitration, when the event must be done, what the event must include, who it must go to. This is where it gets into the nitty-gritty, because notice provisions in a contract will tell you exactly who it needs to be sent to. It'll even say how it needs to be delivered. I can tell you that the AIA contract makes it as confusing as possible, which is not uncommon for AIA contracts, by the way. But they will make it as confusing as possible because there are several different types of notices that need to be given under an AIA contract, and there are several different delivery types that need to be utilized with each of those notices. And then who gets that notice? How the receiving party must respond. What happens if the receiving party doesn't respond as required? A great question here.
Ron?
Yes,
Question.
please, where is that?
Last year, you were pretty emphatic about reaching out and reading probably the second paragraph of the contract to get the prime contract from the contractor
Yes.
because you're bound to it. Are these provisions for these claims in our contract or the prime where would we really look for that?
They can actually be in either.
Okay.
Because the fact of the matter is they should be in yours, but a lot of times, and I've seen this with too many GCs, they make yours really bare-boned and they just incorporate by reference all of the provisions of the prime contract, including notice provisions.
Okay.
So you really need to make sure that you understand both and know both. And by the way, one of the things, and I don't know if I've given you this advice before, I hope I have, but if I haven't, I'll just give you a reminder. If you don't think you're going to get the prime contract, because either you guys don't have a system in place that you feel confident that you're going to get it with every project, or you don't feel comfortable asking the GC for it, revise that provision. It's a very simple provision because usually it just says that this agreement incorporates by reference the prime contract. I always revise it for subcontractors for it to say it incorporates by reference the prime contract if the prime contract is received by the subcontractor prior to the execution of this agreement. So now it puts the onus on the general contractor to get you that prime contract prior to you actually being held to it. You have to have a copy of it at the time you're executing the subcontract agreement. And if it's not received by the subcontractor when you execute the agreement, it's no longer incorporated by reference. So it's an easy way to do it. It's an easy revision. It's not a revision that I've ever had a problem getting in. I don't think I've literally ever seen a GC strike that provision. It'd be very odd for them to, because they're incorporating the prime contract by reference. So if they're basically saying, no, we won't give it to you, it would be very, very strange. So that is one of the things that I would highly recommend. But so this is a good listing. And one of the things that I would do, and this is in the tip section at the bottom of this slide, is have some forms. And what I mean by that is, listen, every claim is different. And there is no form that you can use to just print out when you have a claim and send it off. But what you can have is some of the language already prepared where you can go in and fill in some of the blanks relating to the actual factual situation, what the claim is, et cetera, how it might impact, et cetera. So have that potential claim form already prepared, and understand that that's sort of the easiest way to allow your folks to look at the claim. But please don't put your supervisors, your project managers involved in charge of sending those claims. We're going to get to that. It's a bad idea to just anybody in the company can send out that claim. So now we get into time-related claims, which, by the way, encompasses the majority, as you probably know, of claims. And what starts the time-related claims? Well, the baseline schedule, right? The baseline schedule is where everything starts. All subsequent analysis starts from that baseline schedule that you got at the beginning of the project. So what does that tell you? Hopefully it tells you that you better be accurate with that original baseline schedule. It has to be comprehensive, accurate, and buildable that you're giving, that how long it's going to take you to do your work. And if the GC has already given it to you and said this is how much time you have, then you better have either confirmed that or corrected it, because you're going to be held to it. And when it comes time later, because you did get delayed on the project and everybody knows it, they're going to be looking at you and saying, from the baseline schedule, it doesn't look like you've been delayed at all. What else should you be doing? Well, your number, your bid number, right? We talked about the fact that you give good bid numbers. Well, when you give a good bid number, make sure, I don't care how small the project is, make sure that you have kept a record of how you came up with that bid number. The man hours, the material quantities, all the things that are on this slide, subcontractor proposals, markups, etc. Make sure you have kept a copy of that in the file or your electronic file. You can tell the age. I'm sitting here putting a paper in a file. In your electronic file for that project, so that if you have to go back and now you're trying to show how you were impacted and the cost of the impact, and we're going to get into costing these, that you're going to be able to show that. And again, I say here, maintain for the life of the project. That's absolutely correct and beyond, because of the fact that you may need to turn to that in providing the costs. Because guess what? Again, we talked about properly giving a claim. Well, what else? We want to, again, make sure that you keep your relationship with that general contractor, right? And we talked about the timeliness of it. Well, one of the other things is if you're going to give a delay, if you are going to get to the actual claim part, then you better have backup of how you were delayed and backup of how much it cost you, and be able to really support the costs associated. And when you do that, there really isn't a place for the GC to go. So, strategies so far for preserving a claim: notice. Follow the flow chart that you guys have already prepared, right? You had somebody on your team reading the contracts, putting together that flow chart on how this should go. All of the detail, all of the deadlines in the project and how to serve notice. I'm not talking about some 10-page summary. I'm talking about a single-page summary. So I don't want you guys to get all worried. Oh my gosh, we're going to have these summaries that we have to pour through. No, that's the whole reason we're doing this. It's to read the contract and come up with a single-page summary of the critical issues that you need to understand relating to if you have to bring a claim during the project. Create cost codes. How many of you out there do cost codes when you're delayed on a project or have any impacts on a project? Because the fact of the matter is, cost codes are critical to show exactly how much, again, to support a claim that you may have. And all this is about, remember, what we're talking about, and I get nervous when I'm talking up here about claims, that people are going, claims, I don't do claims, and I don't submit claims. I try to keep people happy. I want you to get paid for your work. It's as simple as that. If you're truly entitled to that, then let's go get paid for it. And it's not going to ruin your relationship. Obtain contemporaneous information while you're going through this, and we're going to get to that. Prepare schedule updates if it really is a scheduling issue, but that's when you really start getting into significant scheduling. We don't need to go through that thoroughly. Maintain contemporaneous records. So claim documentation. What should you be maintaining relating to a potential claim? Well, daily progress reports. I hope you're maintaining those anyway. Labor, material, equipment records, payment requisitions, submittals, meeting minutes. All of these things should be helping you prove your claim. Photographs, videos, RFIs, design and change notices, change orders, punch lists, closeout, and warranty. The biggest thing I can tell you is be detailed, thorough, contemporaneous, and continuing. right through the entire time you feel like you have been impacted by any type of event that's occurred. And again, the event could be delayed in getting in. The event could be while you're working, all of a sudden you're delayed because another subcontractor has to come into the area in which you were working, so you're told, don't come back for a week, we need to get this other issue taken care of. Well, that's an impact to you. And there's lots of different ways you are impacted as a result of that. But keeping the records is what's going to support this. So the field reports, I hope you guys still take field reports, and I hope that they show manpower, equipment, project visitors, weather conditions on the site, delay events, records of phone calls and meetings, basically anything that might be helpful. The biggest one, and it's why it's in bold at the bottom, and this one drives me absolutely bananas. I know I've talked to you guys about this before, but I mention it in so many of my presentations. Photographs! I still feel like sometimes we're in the age of, putting in the flash bulb and you only have 12 photos on this roll. You have the capability of taking 1 million photographs in the next 5 minutes and videotaping everything. So when you're in the project, all of your guys should know to photograph what they're doing as they go along. And they should not leave one day without photographing the work they did that day, because that's going to show what the progress was at what point in time. They're going to show that they did it right. It's going to save you in some claims that are brought against you. Lou can talk to that. By the way, Lou is the best in the business. He and I have worked together 1,000 times, and I appreciate the help he has provided on cases. He's phenomenal. The fact of the matter, though, is that photographs can show things that documents just don't state. And they can cover things in videos too. Just have them make sure every day before they leave the project that they are photographing what has occurred that day. And this is a massively great example. This was a claim that was I think it was a $200 million dispute. It was resolved by what? Photographs. There wasn't one document that could provide the help we needed. The key issue in the dispute: did the subcontractor perform unauthorized modifications to the brackets by enlarging the holes? The dispute, they were saying absolutely not, we never touched those holes. Problem that we had, it was buried in, I think it was 13 feet of concrete. Nobody was ever going to find out whether they actually manipulated those holes. Photographs told the entire story. Our client won that case in a huge way because of photographs taken. So make sure you're taking photographs on the site, you're keeping video records, and it's great. They're all electronic. You don't need to take up storage space other than cloud space. So the fact is take photographs to make sure you're able to support the claim that you're also making, because we're going to do it both in a documentary standpoint and a photographic standpoint. So the next one is, this is my mantra. This is sort of an aside. We're going to get into emails again because I'm going to remind all of you about emails. The fact is that all of your personnel should be advised that anything it's sort of like the Miranda rights, anything they say in an email can and will be used against you in a court of law. The fact of the matter is, I am still amazed when I see, the issue is whether somebody who was at fault in the delay on a project, and we get the email from two guys that sit in cubicles next to each other, and one saying to the other in an email, "Why the heck didn't you order this? This was supposed to be ordered 2 months ago." And you're going, he couldn't have popped his head up over the cubicle and asked them that instead of putting it in writing. It's clearly going to be nothing but a damaging email in any circumstance. And so the fact of the matter is they have to really think about what they're putting in writing in an email. The fact is that if there's any contentious issue that's come up, any type of impact that's come up, yes, you're going to give them a written notice of it. But you're going to want to talk to them verbally about it first so that you can then figure out how they want to take care of it and then put that in writing in a written notice. So again, use emails with caution, incredible caution. And by the way, I think you all know this by now. I know you all know this by now. The whole world knows this by now, but hitting the delete button does not do anything. Anytime we are requesting all documentation, we get hard drives. And the fact is they discover everything that's been deleted, and it looks a heck of a lot worse, or better, depending on which side you're on, if that document is found from the deleted files. So the next thing I want to talk about is, since we're talking about making claims, beware of lien waivers. Because lien waivers are fine. It's all part of the pay app system that to get paid, you're going to file a lien waiver on what you've already worked on and been paid for. But the fact of the matter is, think about what those lien waivers say. Every form lien waiver says the same thing, basically. In very common terms, it's this lien waiver equals payment for all of the work you've performed thus far on the project. Well, if you have a claim that you think you might be making, you're saying you've already been paid for everything you've done on the project up to that point. You just waived your right to a claim because you're saying you've been paid for everything. Now you're saying, oh, no, wait a minute. I've got a claim here for work that was, that we've been delayed on, et cetera. Well, no, that delay started prior to you signing that lien waiver. You've now waived your right. So when you have a potential claim, and again, it doesn't have to be something that's already been liquidated, in other words, something that's already cost you money, but something that might occur, you want to accept that out of the lien waiver. So you're signing the lien waiver, you're executing the lien waiver, but you're putting in there an exception for the potential delay or the potential claim relating to fill in the blank. Okay? It's just so, again, they've already gotten written notice of it, so you're not surprising them, but you're just making it clear in the lien waiver that you're not waiving your right to that claim by stating that you've been paid for everything up to that point. Final lien waiver, the same thing. Final lien waiver says you've been paid for everything on the job. Now you're submitting a claim. They're saying, I don't think so. You already waived it. You waived your right. You said you've been paid for everything. So make sure that you are, again, making sure that you are covering yourself on those. Now we get back to what I said before, and that is that you don't want anybody submitting that notice of potential claim to the general contractor. Anytime you have any type of atypical communication, it should be through one voice in your organization, one. So, and I consider a notice of potential claim a atypical communication. It's not part of just the project going on. You're saying, wait a minute, no, we got something different here, and we may be impacted, and it may have some cost to it. Just want to let you know. That should not come from the supervisor. That should not come from the project personnel. That should come from one person, Michael Scott. No, just joking. It should come from one person in the organization, somebody that you feel is trustworthy, that understands the issues. I don't care if it's the same person that put together the summary or the flow chart relating to the contract language, or if it's the company president, but you guys should think about that as to who that should be, because there should be one voice coming out of that organization so that it's consistent. You don't want inconsistent messages. So now we have talked about so many different things. What about when you get that verbal communication from the GC? No problem on this. No problem on this. We need you guys. You're absolutely right. I'm glad you came to us with this. Please accelerate immediately. We need to get this done on time. So you do so, and you get it done on time. And then you submit your payment for the acceleration. And they say, we never approved that. You finished on time, that's all. You're right on schedule. Why would we pay you anything additional? We don't even think that this was, we think this was just part of your work. All you did was do your work. Well, the fact of the matter is that you were directed to accelerate. There was an exception, there was a understanding and approval that you were going to be delayed, that you were impacted, and that they were now giving you permission to accelerate. So again, what did we say before when you asked this question? Make sure you confirm it in writing. If they don't, if you've asked it to be in writing and they've just dragged their feet, not getting it, guess what? Confirm it in writing with them. Thank you very much for the call. We appreciate it. We will follow your instructions to accelerate based on how we have been impacted by such and such. We don't want to say on an acceleration direction, we don't want to end it with, thank you very much for the call. We will, as instructed, accelerate the work. Because what does that not say? Why we're accelerating the work. They may look at that and say, yeah, no, we told you to accelerate because you were behind. That's why we told you to accelerate. But what we're saying here is we need that confirmation that it's not your fault, that you've been authorized to accelerate because of the impact that you guys incurred in trying to progress your work. Yes, where did that come from? Yes. What's that? Can we go back one slide? There we go.
Addressing potential delays in a project or potential issues that would be a cost impact. So I'm trying, is there an operational aspect to that, or is
Sure.
it a legal aspect to it?
No legal aspect. Legal aspect. And go ahead and finish. I cut
So
you
it's
off.
not a legal aspect, it's an
No.
operational aspect?
It's an operational aspect for this reason. The person that provides that, you want one person doing it because you don't want just a supervisor acting out on his own.
You mean one person on the project?
One person within the organization who does that for all projects.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because you don't want supervisors acting out on their own. You want, anytime you're going to submit a claim, because a claim can turn into litigation. And so you don't, we're hoping it doesn't. That's exactly why we're going through all this. I'm not trying to create litigation for you guys, trust me. I'm trying to get you guys paid for what you deserve to be paid for, without, by the way, my interaction or your attorney's interaction. What I'm saying here is that that's a significant step to take, and I would try to move that up the chain to somebody that's authorized in your organization to be able to do that. Now, it may even be, if your organization is national, that there are people in different regions who have that authority. But I'm just trying to take it away from the personnel on the site. Now, they're going to know the most, by the way, about what that delay is and how it's implicated, et cetera. They may have to assist that individual who's who's signing the bottom of that letter. But this is a way for the organization to understand. It's coming out of one voice. It's not coming out of, oh, well, the supervisor sent that. Now all of a sudden the GC is contacting the vice president. The vice president didn't even know there was a delay on the project, didn't know what the impact was, didn't know what the cause, we're trying to get one voice.
Yeah, I would think that would be organizationally, depending upon what level of responsibility you put at the account executive level
That's correct.
Or on a project, that it may not necessarily go to a higher level, but your account executive might have a tremendous amount of responsibility for the project, is the only reason I ask if there's a legal reason for it.
Yeah, and the only legal reason I will give you is I have been in situations where, okay, now we've made the formal claim and we have a little dispute going on and we're trying to resolve that dispute, but we've got one person making the claim over here, we've got another person submitting an email over here that is converse to that. We've now got somebody responding to their response who's different from that, and they're not all congealing. And so what we're trying to do is create one voice that is the communication between the GC and the contractor making that claim, so that it is nice and concise and simple. And that person can get all the information he needs to or she needs to from their organization. But it needs to be that one voice, so that you don't have lots of different messages being sent, which can ruin your claim. So that's why it is an organizational thing, but it has a ramification from a legal standpoint. So what are the different types of claims? Types of claims. So you thought you were through here, okay, we're talking about, well, I want to talk to you about a lot of different types of claims. We're going to go through each one of these, so you can just look at the slide right now and see that there's a number of different types of claims. But the first one we're talking about is differing site conditions. And it's funny because when I talk to people, people jump to, isn't differing site conditions for basically like geotechs and hitting, sunken ships and, and other things underground? Well, of course not. Differing site conditions is what you guys have to deal with every day. Differing site conditions is basically finding that there's additional moisture in the slab that we weren't counting on, that obviously now isn't consistent with the requirements of the specified materials that we were to use on the project. So there's lots of different types of differing site conditions, and there's two what we call types of site conditions. Type 1 is where the site condition differs because it is inconsistent with contract documents. What the specifications are in the contract documents, these are different. Type 2 is, okay, it wasn't mentioned in the contract documents, but this is different than what we would expect in the ordinary course of business. So those are the two different types. They're both differing site conditions. They both can lead to claims, but they are different in those ways. Field conditions can refer to any field condition that varies from what is either shown in the contract documents or what is actually shown in the field and what they thought would be in the field. So the next one is, and so you can have a claim for that, obviously. You guys know that. It's probably the most common. Come on. We have moisture in the slab. We now have to, hold on, stop. We're going to have to do some different prep. We're going to have to where's Thomas? Surenex. we may have to be doing lots of different things here. But the fact of the matter is that, yes, we got a question way back there. Yes.
And the wording was what the parties otherwise expect?
Yes.
So how would you quantify that, and would it relate to industry standards? I mean, how do you really define and prove what somebody would expect?
Industry standards is where you start. If there are no industry standards on it, if you can show that that is common in the industry, because that's the term we usually use, is common in the industry, that can be utilized as well. That's utilized all the time in type 2 differing site conditions. And it's really not in your line of work, it's not very difficult to prove differing site conditions because flooring is pretty consistent. There's other lines of work where differing site conditions type 2 is very difficult to prove from a construction standpoint. And by the way, I don't see a line at the drinks. Come on, you guys need to drink more. Common cause of projects are what? The implied warranty of defective plans. So you guys have this great case that I don't know that many of you probably know or care, but it's the best thing that ever happened to contractors. It's called the Spearin Doctrine. It comes out of a case, you ready for this? 1918. It's this wonderful case that says what? It's a very simple principle. It says if you followed the plans and specifications and did them properly and followed them properly, you're not responsible. It's a phenomenal case for you guys, the best case ever. It came down literally in 1918 from the Supreme Court, and guess what? In the over 100 years since then, it has never been overturned. And it has been utilized and relied upon thousands, probably millions of times since. And it has never been overturned. And so that is where the defective plans claim comes from. Now, obviously, this gets a little bit hairy when what? We now have, this was at a time when basically the only delivery model in the construction industry was what? Design, bid, build. Of course, now we have design, build, we have design assist, we have integrated project delivery, we have all sorts of things that now start to blend what a contractor and a designer do. And guess what? If you're involved in that design, you might not have the Spearin Doctrine anymore. Because it's hard to say, all I have to do is follow the plans and specs, and if there's an issue with the plans and specifications, that's not me. Spearin, when you had a foot involved in the design itself. Okay? Little problem there. We got a question.
So you're suggesting we have something in the specification materials?
That very well may. The question was, does that apply even if we've had a hand in the specification materials? It very well may dilute the Spearin Doctrine. Doesn't mean we won't use the Spearin Doctrine on your behalf, but it certainly may. If we're trying to say that the specifications weren't appropriate for the project when you've had a hand in what was selected as the materials, then that potentially could be a problem. Now, if there was a difference in the portion of the material selection or specifications in which you were involved versus what is now failing, that may not. But I'm telling you that could have a difference. But that's and it's one of the most common. I mean, when was the last time you guys saw a perfect set of plans for a project? If you ask an architect, the answer is every time. Because come on, architects don't make mistakes. Of course not. Okay, there goes my Christmas basket from AIA. So the implied warranty is the implied warranty that your plans and specifications are going to be appropriate, that are given to you from the owner or from the general contractor. That can be a basis for a claim. In the fact that, okay, we're in there now, the plans and specs don't meet, and we're going to now have to do X. Which, by the way, if you're going to have to do something different, what? Say it, you should get paid for it. So that's one of the things that we're trying to get to here. We want to make sure you're paid for the work you do. So next is what we call active or constructive acceleration, suspension, or delay. So delays can be caused by a lot of things. I have down here just strikes, adverse weather, acts of God, other things. One thing I don't have down here, probably should, pandemics. Didn't think about that one at the time this was originally done. But clearly, that's a great example. I can tell you that from the time that everything came to a halt in March of 2020 to about July or so of 2020, our firm Now, our firm is very large. Our firm has about 250 attorneys. We have about 35 of us that do nothing but construction. Our firm sent out over 1,000 notices of potential claims during that one period of time for contractors all over the country, because we had no idea how long the impact would be, how severe the impact would be, and what type of costs we would have. And they all went out immediately. We began the work immediately. Contractors weren't waiting to see if they would be impacted, didn't wait until they had the costs relating to whatever impact would occur. They sent them out immediately so that everybody understood what potentially could happen. Yes, sir?
I just have a question regarding the prior scenario where you said if it's on the plans and specs,
Yeah.
you cannot be held liable. So, but if we get direction in writing or incorporated into the plans or specs, that where they want us to do something where we know there is a great likelihood of failure, I thought we were liable, because are we not the expert?
Oh,
So
no,
if
no,
we
no.
do something
If-
we know is wrong, I thought that's why you didn't get a waiver on
You're getting-
installing over moisture, say.
Right. So now you're getting into, this is an interesting question. I love the question. This is a great one. The question, in case you didn't hear it from the beginning, is what if the plans and specs were set in a way that as you're doing the project, you know is a problem, and that you select, I think this is what you're saying, you select to do it a different way.
No, I'm saying if we make clear that we would like to do it a different way,
Okay.
there'll be an additional cost involved.
Yeah.
That's rejected. They say, no, this is what we want. And then you get them to sign a waiver saying, this is against standard means and methods, the subcontractor will not be responsible, blah, blah, blah. But I've had attorneys tell me that waiver is not good enough.
We're going to, actually, I've got slides on that. You're clairvoyant. So we're going to cover that. What he asked is, okay, let me clarify the statement in question that was just made, because it's a great one. It's going to lead into a couple of the slides I have for later, which is what happens when the plans and specs you guys know aren't going to work for that project. And you go to and you file your notice of potential claim that these are not going to work. And they say, go for it anyway. We're telling you to follow the plans and specifications. And then it fails, and you're held responsible. And the fact is that he said, we've talked about that a waiver. He's talked to his attorneys, and they said if you get a waiver for that, it can't be upheld. I'm going to keep you waiting for the answer to that one, because we're going to talk about that. So the next thing. I love doing that. The next thing is the active suspension delay. In almost all cases, anytime there's delay, there is a financial impact. But when we're talking about active and constructive suspensions or delays, what are we talking about? So constructive suspension, active suspension's easy, right? Active suspension is what we just talked about, acts of God, pandemics where you have a project that you're not allowed to go forward with because the state has closed down all work. Constructive suspension occurs when an owner delays the project, or an owner or a general contractor delays the project so long that it is basically a constructive suspension of the project. And as a result of that is, you're going to have costs relating to that, right? I hope you all understand that. And that is a basis for a claim. We're just talking about some basis for a claim here. Acceleration. If you have been required to accelerate the project, just basically the opposite of delays, have been required to accelerate the project, you are entitled to a claim. And that claim better include the premium time for labor. It better include the inefficiencies of tired workers. Now, all of you may look at me and go, what? Because inefficiency claims are one of the most lost items in costs that I can think of. We had, and this is going to be, I think, shocking to most of this room, we had a mechanical contractor about 3 years ago come to us, maybe about 5 years ago, because it was about 3 years ago we resolved it. About 5 years ago, come to us and said, we have a mass inefficiency claim. And we said, all right, tell us about it. Their contractors, their owners that they were working for, they were actually working for a GC, but the GC actually owned the general contractor. They were required to put on 3 groups of employees, 3 different times, 24 hours a day. They worked 7 days a week, 24 hours a day with these 3 sets of crews, and they did it for almost a year. There are all sorts of inefficiency claim analysis that are done. In fact, the Army Corps of Engineers have put out their charts of how much efficiency you lose as you start overworking workers. We had ready to swallow, a $14 million claim. We won. All on inefficiency. So don't ever underestimate an inefficiency claim when you guys have been required to accelerate, and understand the costs of that. When you're asking guys to work 12 hours or whatever to make up for it, weekends to make up for it, efficiencies decline, and they decline pretty dramatically when you look at the charts that are out there. So make sure that if you're putting in a claim for acceleration, that you look at the inefficiency costs relating to that. And if you need those charts, I can certainly get them to you. They're pretty impressive. The next is excusable and compensable delays. The difference between excusable and compensable. Excusable are ones that neither party are really responsible for, so you don't get your costs relating to that. Compensable delays are those that there is a party responsible, and as a result of that, you do get your costs. Concurrent delays, though, can wipe that out, because now you have, okay, well, you were impacted by this, but you forgot to order the material, and so the material didn't even come in. You may have been delayed 2 weeks because of what another subcontractor did in the area of your work, but since you forgot to get the material and the material didn't come in for 2 weeks, guess what? Concurrent delays. You don't just get the 2 weeks because they delayed you. You had a concurrent delay. No damage for delay clauses. Wake up if you were sleeping. Get them out of your contracts. Get them out of your contracts. No damage for delays are hidden in every contract, or not every contract, but some contracts, where all it is a clause that basically says that you can't get, and usually we won't talk about time. Once in a while it'll add in time. But you can't get costs for delays of the owner or the contractor. Now why would you sign that? So they can sit there and delay you all they want. They can chop up your work where you were supposed to work for the next 6 months, and instead every other day they're telling you can't come back to the site. And you can't collect any costs for that, but yet that provision is a provision that is found in so many subcontracts, it's crazy. Strike that provision if you possibly can. At least try to negotiate it out. And now I'm going to tell you one way to potentially avoid it, even if it's in, and that is the inefficiency claim that we just talked about. Because inefficiency claims can be brought, even if there is a no damage for delay clause. Because an inefficiency claim is not a delay claim. It's an acceleration claim with inefficiencies because of the acceleration requirement. So you can actually bring it back in even under a no damage for delay. So obviously different things. So how do you determine whether you've been delayed on a project or whether you have been, whether there's inefficiencies? Well, one way, in the most accepted way in the industry, is called the measured mile. Anybody heard of a measured mile? Because all this is, It's a very easy and simple process to figure out, actually. I'm going to use a simple example of you've been doing this work, and you've got a history on this project of doing one room every day. You've been able to complete the flooring in one room. It takes you one day with your crew. And all of a sudden, you have begun to be interfered with by another subcontractor who's finishing some of the other work that's going on, and the room's available. And all of a sudden, your work turns to 3 days for one room. Very identical rooms. It's a hotel, whatever you want to use as the example, but similar rooms. But now it's taking 3 days. The measured mile is the time that you were working without an impact. And when you were working without an impact, you were doing it 1 day, one room. Then there was an impact. Now you're at 3 days, one room. Guess what you're entitled to? 2 days. 2 days. You've been impacted by 2 days. And so now the costs associated with that, you should be recovering. It's a very simple method to utilize, and it's a very accepted method by all courts. It's the most accepted by all courts. So that's what really starts to get into that inefficiency claim. Shows up a lot in when you've been required to accelerate a project, and you start seeing that, where as the project starts to go through during that long acceleration period, where you start to see the inefficiency show up, where it's taking 3 days to do one room, where it was at the beginning taking 1 day. So now you get into the loss of efficiency productivity claims and how they arise. They arise under all of these circumstances that I've listed. I don't think there's any need to go through all these. And now how to prepare the claim. And I know that some of you, in fact, I had a couple of you come up to me when we were talking earlier about what my presentation was today and say, Ron, can you just prepare us a form claim that we can just utilize? The answer is I'd love to. I can't. There is no form claim that you can prepare, because every form is dependent on the contract that was signed. It was dependent on the work. It was depending on the impact that that caused the claim, and it's dependent on what your costs relating to that claim and how those costs were arrived at. So again, what I can help you with, though, is this. This is an important slide. How to prepare your claim. So now you've given a notice of a potential claim, right? We talked about that, and that's not a formal document. Now you're into how to prepare the claim, okay? You gave them notice of a potential claim that might happen, and it did. You ended up being delayed by 2 weeks on the project. You guys had to go 2 weeks longer. You incurred all sorts of different costs that we're going to get into, because I still haven't gotten into the cost part of this. But what do you need to put in there? What do you need to put into that notice now? Now you actually are filing the notice of claim. Well, you put in there an executive summary, just a summary of what went on the project, that caused this. And then you go into the next thing, relevant contract provisions. So you're now saying to them that we're entitled to this under article, whatever it is, in your subcontract agreement. Identification of key issues, events, and milestones, those are the facts. Confirmation of adherence to the relevant contract. So now you're saying you were entitled to this under Article 2.13. But now you're saying to them the reason why you're entitled to it under Article 2.13 is this. You're explaining it out. That's the next one. Discussion of substantive entitlement, again, the facts. For time-related claims, schedule comparison, you need to put in that schedule impact analysis. If you are going to say that you were impacted in some way, if it's a delay, if it's a timing issue, you're going to need to show them why, how you got to that 2-week period, how it was, how you were impacted from a scheduling impact. And remember I told you about the baseline schedule, how that was important? Well, it's critical, because that's where you're showing this was supposed to take us a 1 month period, and it ended up taking us 6 weeks. And if you didn't get that 1 month right in the baseline schedule, it's going to be hard when you go back to them and say it took 6 weeks if you didn't get it right the first time in the baseline schedule. Because if the baseline schedule said 6 weeks and you knew you could do it in a month, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to collect that claim. It's going to be very difficult because all you've done is finished it in the time that you said you were going to finish it to begin with, without any acceleration costs. So that's important. Detailed analysis of costs with supporting backup. This is where I told you, you can't just go in there and say, well, it cost us about this much. We had this much in. That's where you get a general contractor going, what are you trying to do to me? Come on. So it's giving them all of the information, then a conclusion, and an attachment of exhibits. That the attachment of exhibits is the most important thing, because again, we're trying to show them, here's all the documentation. This is what I'm doing for you. You're the general contractor. I'm giving you the whole layout and all the documents and exhibits to go with it, so that guess what? You can go to the owner very easily and pass it right up the chain. We're not trying to hit you. We're not trying to hit you, general contractor. We're not trying to hit anybody. We're trying to get paid for the work we did, and there was extra work because of these issues. And here's all of the reasoning, and here's all of the supporting documentation. You can bundle these up, put a bow on it, and just send it right up for payment. And a general contractor wants to get you paid. There's not a lot of general contractors. I wouldn't be working for them, frankly, if there was general contractors that were saying, we don't want to get you paid. They just don't want to pay it themselves. They want to get it from up above them. They want to get it from the owner. So they just want you to give them what they need to get it passed through. And that's what we're trying here is, and that's how you're preparing this. So now preparing the cost section of it. Utilize the tracking costs based on cost codes. So you need to create additional cost codes on that project so that it shows what the impact is afterwards. For those additional 2 weeks, you want cost codes now. Now they're putting their time under a different cost code for those last 2 weeks than they were for the project, right? You're using a cost code on that project. But now the easiest way to keep track of this is create an additional cost code for that project that basically gets all of the extra time that you guys ended up having to work on that project as a result of it. Identify all the direct and indirect costs, and recognize all of the different cost areas. I just have several down here to try to help you guys out remembering. Escalation costs for labor, escalation costs for material, for incidentals, out of sequence work. You guys know all about out of sequence work because it happens all the time, unfortunately. Loss of efficiencies resulting from overtime fatigue. Again, it can be hours in a day, it can be working weekends and days consecutive. All of that results in fatigue and inefficiencies. General conditions, extended general conditions on the project. Field costs for extended durations. Unabsorbed home office expenses. All sorts of different expenses. And as long as you've tracked them, you're entitled to them. And again, it's not about looking like, oh gosh, look at this claim that they sent. If it is organized properly, if they got the timely notice of it from the beginning, and you have cost-coded it properly throughout so that you actually have support for the costs you have, that general contractor is going to understand, and he's going to shoot it right up, and he's going to basically support you in it. Yes? You took my thunder. It's a great comment. What was just stated was the fact that there's one thing we're missing here, and we are. GC makes markup off of us. GC makes money on this. So the GC isn't pissed at you for putting in a change or a claim. They make money off your claim. You don't think they're marking this up? You're joking. And so you're sitting here saying, geez, I don't want to put that claim in because I don't want to ruin my relationship. You're just costing yourself. Because the GC is going to put it in. As long as you've given them that nice package that we just talked about, that we just put together and put a big bow on it for them, they're loving it. Because they're just sticking their markup on it in the end, and whoop, up it goes. They make money, you make money. And the fact is that, again, what I don't want to mistake is that I'm saying here, you make money. This is a money-making thing. No. This is getting you paid for what you did. This is getting you paid for the work you performed, which you absolutely deserve. And the GC is making money off of it. They are making money off of it. But the fact of the matter is, that's why they're going to support it as it goes up. And that's why they are not going to look at you and say, geez, I don't want to work with them again. Of course they're not. Why do you think the GCs are still seeking out that electrical company that's the #1 electrical company in the Northeast? Why? Because the GCs make money off of it too. It's exactly, you took my thunder. It's a great point. So when we're talking about the schedule, you literally have to look at, obviously, the impact on the critical path of the schedule to determine whether there is delay for the entire project versus just your work. And again, if it's a huge claim, you're talking about getting a schedule impact analysis expert involved. We use them constantly. But again, those are for large scheduling impacts. So now we come back to your question. If you notice, take a look at the slide. So now we're talking about hold harmless agreements and indemnification and hold harmless agreements. So one way to get around the issues that you brought up, this issue of, okay, we get a plan and spec, we recognize this is not going to work. And we go to the GC and we say, it's not going to work. That's going to fail. This is why. And they say, no, do it. Now you are being asked to do something that has a different site condition to it, because that's what you're talking about here. You're talking about maybe moisture in the slab. We'll use that as a general example that doesn't coordinate with the or comply with the requirements of the specifications. And they're saying, no, you need to do it anyway. Well, what I would recommend to you is the use of an indemnification and hold harmless agreement that is properly presented, properly drafted, I mean. And the fact is that they are utilized, they are upheld. I apologize that I disagree with your attorney because we've gotten them upheld a number of times. The question is what was it drafted properly? And they have to be, everything about them has to be drafted properly. Because there are a number of ways, and this is where your attorney is correct, there's a number of ways to have them disqualified, or to nullified, I should say. And it also depends on your jurisdiction and what they look at in your jurisdiction for those specificities in a indemnification and hold harmless agreement. But we've utilized those. I've even utilized those for some of the companies in this room. And in fact, I will tell you, we recently had one where the interesting thing is that we prepared the indemnification and hold harmless agreement. They refused to execute it, but did let us out of the contract as a result of it, because I think they knew the probability of the failure. They hired another subcontractor, and that subcontractor is having all sorts of problems on the site. So it was the best thing we ever did was not go forward with the work as they were requiring us to do based on the issues in the subfloor. So the fact is that you can use these, you just need to do them properly. And here's just a couple of the things, and this is not all of them, but this is a couple of the things that you need to have in an indemnification and hold harmless agreement. The first thing is I have a lot of people that use a indemnification agreement. I got one sent to me, which was a standard form, that was just an indemnification agreement. That's great. Do you guys know what an indemnification agreement is? An indemnification agreement basically is that we will indemnify you if you are found to be correct. It doesn't say that they're going to pay for your defense as you continue through it. You need the whole harmless part of it. So it's critical, and especially in some jurisdictions, relating to the hold harmless is a critical piece of an indemnification and hold harmless agreement. You can't just have an indemnification agreement or you're not going to like the results of it. The next thing you're going to need to do is a detailed summary of the concern that you had to begin with, of what it is in that project, or what it is in that scope, or what it is in the plans and specifications that gives you the concern that you can't proceed or should not proceed with the work that is currently outlined, and why it's different than you had initially, why it's a type 1 or type 2 differing site condition, okay? You don't have to use those terms, type 1 or type 2. You just tell them what the difference is. A statement that the contractor is still directing you to move forward with the work. In other words, that you've given your concern, the contractor is still telling you to move forward with the work, and that they agree to defend and indemnify you. I use it even after the term hold harmless is in there. I always put in defend just so that we know that that's clear, that they're going to provide counsel if we get sued on this, because that's what ends up happening. Yes, sir, Rob? Indemnification agreement is usually put on as an additional amendment to the contract. Yeah, and it's just a separate agreement between the owner and, the subcontractor and the general contractor, or the owner, depending on if you have a direct contract with the owner.
Can it be handled via email?
What's
Or is
that?
is this just stuff you email out
Oh,
to
no,
them?
no. This is a formal document. I want a wet signature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have to reference the prime typically?
What's that?
Do you have to reference the prime contract typically?
You don't have to reference any contract. You reference the project. Well, I shouldn't say that. You reference the project. You reference your subcontract agreement. But you do not have to reference the prime contract. The prime contract, if it's incorporated by reference into your subcontract, you've already referenced the prime contract.
Should you itemize what is at stake? Like, if you order me to proceed, these conditions don't meet the specification, the cost to remove, replace, and put this back is this much?
No, I don't usually go that far. What I do put in there is that we believe that if we move forward with it, there will be flooring failures.
Would these same rules apply to a direct end user project?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, same thing. And by the way, I literally just did one about 2 weeks ago, for a company, I believe they were in St. Louis. Anyway, the GC readily, without changing a word in it, by the way, which is shocking to me, actually executed the document. And so now my guy is pretty clear of liability as he completes the project. And then finally specifying that and defining what the contractor is indemnifying you from. Make sure that's in there. Yes, sir, we've got a...
Ron, since
Yeah.
you said those GCs want to sign that to make the money on it, can you expand a little bit why in that case that they didn't sign that one?
On the indemnification, GCs don't want to sign indemnification and hold harmless agreements. They want to sign a claim that you're making for additional costs.
Correct, but I did get that a little confused, but back to why they didn't sign that.
Yeah, they didn't sign the indemnification and hold harmless agreement because they were nervous about the fact that they would now be responsible for the failure that we were telling them they were heading for. We literally had said to them that based on the subfloor that, or actually in that case, the slab, that the flooring was going to fail as specified They told us to move forward with it. We said no. We gave them the hold harmless agreement that said, basically, you're going to indemnify us if we're going to perform this, that you would be responsible because we think it's, for these reasons, it's going to fail, and that if it fails, we take no responsibility, and that you are directing us to perform the work, and so we will move forward with the work, but only understanding that you will indemnify us from all claims made relating to any type of flooring failure.
So if you would have read, and you probably don't know this, but you think the owner rejected that to them?
No, I don't know what happened between the owner and the GC, but I know that all we know is that the GC rejected it from us and said, we're not signing this, you need to just move forward with it. We said no. They said, well, we're going to hire a replacement contractor. Well, they were not terminating us. There was an agreement to terminate for convenience. They terminated us. They went on, hired a new subcontractor who had, again, all sorts of problems with it. Yes?
I want to say one thing to the group, because I think Ross is still over there. He is. A lot of our attorneys have told us that, a waiver in moisture as an example, if you get them to sign the waiver, you get the architect, the owner, the general contractor to sign it, you're still at risk because we're experts and we knew. But what you're saying is, and maybe we have to relook at this, is we provide waivers on the back side of the website, but a waiver's not good enough. You've really got to have a carefully crafted hold harmless agreement.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
A waiver doesn't do it. Because what you're saying in the indemnification and hold harmless agreement is you're explaining to them, you are the expert, by the way. You are the flooring contractor, and we're talking about flooring here. So you are stating to them in the indemnification agreement, and remember, these have to be individual. There's no indemnification agreement and hold harmless form that should just be utilized, each time. You're stating to them the exact
That's totally
reason.
contrary to what I used to know. That's good.
Yeah, the exact reason why you think that this is going to fail. And you're specifically stating in that indemnification and hold harmless agreement why you believe that if you move forward with this, this is going to fail, and that you're unwilling to, but you are being directed to by the general contractor, and therefore the general contractor is agreeing to take on your responsibility, to take on and to hold you harmless from any and all claims. This is much different than a waiver. You can't just waive your claims to that. That would be against public policy. You're accepting the claims. You're just saying, if I get hit with them, you're paying for the attorney and you're indemnifying us from it. That's much different than a waiver. So when the other attorneys told you that a waiver isn't going to hold up, they're absolutely correct. And so, but a hold harmless, indemnification and hold harmless agreement, if carefully drafted, will. So that's all I will say about that. Unless there's more questions. If there's more questions, I don't want to shut them off. Yes, one back here.
As you were speaking of there, trying to, and then we list the specific reasons as to why we're waiving that.
Say that again, if you can
For
start
the
that again.
hold harmless agreement, we have a general one, and then we just list what the specific reason is, moisture-related, subfloor conditions. Is that okay, or you're saying draft a new one for each circumstance?
I will tell you that even myself, I have a form that I'll use, but that form is about 3 paragraphs. And by the time I'm done with an indemnification and hold harmless agreement, it's about 2.5 pages. And so it is not a form in the fact that I just fill in a couple of blanks through it. You really have to be specific about it. It's not going to hold up if you're not specific about the issues because the other thing you're asking is you're not asking for just some complete indemnification and hold harmless agreement from any and all, of your work on the project. No GC is going to accept that, and no GC ever should. You're not getting you're not getting this get out of jail free card even if I don't install it properly. What you're asking, what you're stating is exactly the reason you think it will fail. And if it fails, and it's found to be that reason, they are defending you and holding you harmless. That's what you are doing. So that's why it's so specific to each instance that it's very hard to just say, here's this form, just follow this and put in those blanks. It really is. It's very, very difficult to do that. Like I said, even mine is basically rewritten for every specific circumstance. Any other questions on that? This is a really interesting topic, and I know that there was some misunderstandings out there relating to it.
Yeah, quick question. For hold harmless forms with a contract through general contractor,
Yes.
and we, as far as our firm goes and how George Donnelly helped with it, I think you looked at it recently as well, but on the topic of having a signature field for the owner and the general contractor and the architect on there, do we need, obviously run a contract with the general contractor, but if they pass it to the owner and just the owner signs it, is that an issue with a gap jumping over the general to the owner, or any issues there?
Normally what happens is the GC basically mirrors your agreement with the owner. That's how I handle it for the GC. I will just tell you that I don't have just the owner sign the GC, the agreement between the sub and the GC, because it becomes very unclear as to who's indemnifying and defending who. I will have my GC execute the agreement if I think it's appropriate with the subcontractor, and then have my GC execute a new agreement with the owner that mirrors it. Normally, we do ask for that first. We go up the chain, and that's probably what's going to happen in your case is the GC goes to the owner and basically says, this is the issue. Do you want them to proceed, or do you want to change the specs and to what the flooring contractor has requested? We think it's going to cost you X amount. The flooring contractor's already told us this is probably going to be the cost to do what's necessary. If the owner says, no, I don't want to do that, the GC says, well, then they're asking us to indemnify them. We're asking you to indemnify us. And when we get that contract signed, then the GC signs yours. So it just flows, again, it just flows up the chain. And so, yeah, I forget who had asked the question, but it was an astute question of whether or not that wasn't signed because the owner wouldn't sign an agreement with the GC. It very well could have been in that instance. I have no idea of knowing what communication went between the GC and the owner, because in that instance, I was representing the subcontractor. It's one of you guys, actually, and I won't name who it was. Any other questions on this issue? Because this is a great issue. Okay, then I'll move on. So the subcontractor must continue to perform its work. As we talked about, this is just a summary at the end. Disputes may be resolved before the arbitrator or a court if this continued. If the owner rejected it from the GC then rejected it from you. If you really want that claim to go through, the next step in the process is to know how to bring that claim. In other words, whether it needs to go to mediation, whether it goes to arbitration, et cetera. But that's all, again, where is that found? In the contract. So that should be in the summary. Again, you have so many days to file it, so many days to get it to mediation, et cetera. All those deadlines are set forth in your contract, so make sure you read the contract. Make sure you have all those in that summary. And understand what are conditions precedent. In other words, that in most cases, mediation is a condition preceding to arbitration. Everybody know what the difference between mediation and arbitration is? Those get confused sometimes. Mediation is nothing but a negotiation basically in front of a mediator who is attempting to help you resolve it with the general contractor. You guys are just talking basically back and forth. The mediator is talking to you, the mediator is talking to them, and tries to bring you guys together. If he can't get you guys to voluntarily, it's a voluntary process. Neither one of you are mandated. The mediator is not saying you need to pay X, you need to accept X. He's just talking to you and trying to convince the two parties to find a place in the middle. For an arbitration, that is a binding process like a court, just like if you went through a court case, a litigation matter, all the way through court. It's just instead, it takes place in an office, usually the attorney's office, and it is just an arbitrator on the end who, guess what? Unlike a judge or unlike a jury, that arbitrator knows construction law. And so what is that, who's that benefit? So I'm going to give you a little tip here. In so many contracts, you have a choice. If there's a dispute, doesn't have to be about a delay or a claim or anything like that. If there's a dispute on the project, what is that dispute resolution process? And whether you want arbitration or litigation, as a contractor, there's one box that you should always be checking. It's arbitration. And the reason being is because, for one, in litigation, there's a couple of reasons. In litigation, in a court, you don't have control potentially over whether it is a judge trial or a jury trial. And the reason that's a problem for you, and the reason you don't have control over it, is because in most states, only one party needs to check off jury. Only one party. And if that other party checks off jury, you got a problem. Because guess what? What is a jury made up of? Juries aren't made up of you guys, that's for sure. They're not made up of contractors. They're not made up of people who are used to building buildings. They're made up of what? They're made up of common folk. Soccer moms, I hate to use that as an example, but I'll use it. Soccer moms, Joe business guy who's an accountant or whatever, they're just business people. They're just common people. They have nothing to do with construction. And so what are they doing? They're sitting there and they're back in the jury room and they're saying what? Well, I don't know, but when I hired a plumber to come fix my sink, I don't know about plumbing, but I expected it to be done right and it leaked, so I'd expect him to take care of it. They hired a flooring contractor, flooring failed. Flooring contractors should be responsible. That's what's going to happen, because that's the mentality of what goes on, because they don't know construction and they don't know construction law. So you don't want to put it in the hands of a jury if you don't have to. So make sure you choose arbitration, because arbitration, we get to select, the two attorneys and the two parties get to select an arbitrator. And the arbitrator panels usually consist of, the potential panels usually consist of people like myself. I do arbitrations myself. But the fact is they are industry-specific individuals who are engineers, who are construction attorneys, who understand construction and they understand construction law, and they aren't going to be sitting there thinking about their own plumbing. Okay? So when you're selecting whether you want arbitration or litigation in your subcontract agreement or in your contract agreement, if it's directly with the owner, you want arbitration. It's also quicker, and it's also a little bit cheaper. It's not significantly cheaper anymore because discovery has gotten more broad in arbitration, but it's somewhat cheaper. But those are all the reasons why you should be choosing arbitration over litigation. So in the end, much like Lou said, I've got your back, to use Adam's statement at the beginning of this. That's why I'm here. That's why Fuse is here. That's why guys like Lou is here. We want to make sure that you're protected. We want to make sure, in this case, this is a little bit different than what I've talked about before, because in years past when I've talked to you guys, I've talked to be more in a defensive standpoint. Do this to defend against that. Do this to defend against that. Today I'm talking about what? Getting you paid for the work that you performed on a project that you're rightfully entitled to. And I want to see you guys do that. I want next year, if I'm invited back, to hear how you guys have collected more in the work you've done, because you've begun to incorporate this into your business. And it's what? it's not inhibited your relationships, it's enhanced your relationships with your GCs. And I'm going to tell you that's what ends up happening. So I hope this has been helpful. Any other questions? I got about 5 minutes. More questions. The bar's still open. Yes.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
In the effective work, most of the labor is Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm beginning to see a lot of provisions that talk about having full-time English-speaking personnel on site.
Yeah.
And they usually won't waive it. But as my understanding, if it's something in the contract that's clearly discriminatory, it's not enforceable. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to show why that was necessary from a safety standpoint, and they may be able to, depending on, because language barriers, don't get me wrong, there is a discriminatory sense to that, and I think everybody jumps to that, but if it can be outweighed by safety issues on a construction site relating to inability to communicate. So that is why you are seeing this, that's why you may continue to see that. And don't get me wrong, we see it. It's funny. I don't know where each of you practices, although or performs your work. Although I know a lot of you because I've been able to help so many of you, and I thank you for that. But the fact is that the language barrier in the workforce in this industry has become prevalent in all parts of the country, and so that's why we're starting to see those provisions more and more. And again, they are discriminatory. You may be able to strike it, nullify it down the road if it was ever called into question. The issue is that they may be able to prove that it was necessary from a safety standpoint. Another question? Oh, back here. Here we go.
Diving over chairs.
So yeah, my question is, what if you're in a situation like most of us are, where we have many jobs on the go, and labor is limited, and you just don't have the capability to ramp up, or the guys just can't, or the crews just can't work every Sunday or every Saturday? Are you supposed to hire your competitor to help finish that job, and then part two to that is then if you move all your labor to that job to ramp it up, what happens to those other jobs?
It's a great question. I mean, obviously, if it's your fault that you are late on a project and need to accelerate, then you're going to have to figure out a way to get that labor there, whether it is hiring your competitor to assist or hiring additional manpower in some other way. If it is not your fault, and they're mandating your acceleration, which is a change to the contract. Remember, all changes do not have to be complied with. They can be requested. If you are unable to complete a change that you haven't accepted yet, then you don't have to comply with that. In other words, if you're behind because of the fact that everything was pushed, you couldn't start for 2 weeks after your start date, and now they're saying we need you to accelerate and get 10 more guys here than we're scheduled to be on. And remember I told you, when you give your bid, you need to keep all your records of how you gave that bid. Well, part of that is, what's your manpower on the project? What was your anticipated manpower? And now they're saying to you, well, I don't care that your anticipated manpower was 10 guys a day to get done in that 4-week period of time. We need it done in 2 weeks now. So you need to get 20 guys there. You need to be able to show, well, we were only anticipating 10. We can't get 20. And so if you want to accelerate, you need to go out there and get the supplemental work and pay for the supplemental work. Okay? Well, that, I think, brings to an end the short man segment of the Fuse conference, and I appreciate following Lou so that I look tall. But I'm serious about the fact that you guys belong to a wonderful organization, one that does have your back, and you got people like Lou and so many great people here that have your back. I'm just one of many, and I hope that I'm always here for you guys anytime you need me. You're led by, I can't think of a better executive director, period, within the Construction Industries Association, and I mean that. I truly mean that. Jeff, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.